Welcome, everyone. I wanted to dive into a crucial topic that affects a lot of people's relationships, and that is the impact of childhood trauma on intimacy. One of the significant barriers that I found in my marriage to a childhood trauma survivor was creating deep connections with my husband. So before I talk about the steps that my husband and I took to create more intimacy in our relationship, I do want to talk a little bit more about why this occurs in trauma survivors. At the root of most intimacy issues with trauma survivors, it usually all stems from trust. In many cases, the perpetrators of this childhood abuse had created and built trust with this child and created a false sense of intimacy prior to the abuse occurring. This profound betrayal can make managing closeness in future relationships challenging and very uncomfortable. But I do want to talk about a little bit of a nuance that I experienced in my relationship, that as I am talking with other wives who are supporting through the childhood trauma recovery process, that they experience as well. And it's actually called the closeness distance dynamic. And it's where you can see this seesawing in your relationship, where at certain times your husband wants to be close, wants reassurance, wants to know your thoughts, wants to be close, and then with the flip of a switch needs distance and wants to deal with whatever is going on his own. So it seemed like I was constantly trying to figure out where my husband was at, whether he was looking for this closeness that at times seemed almost too much, almost overwhelming, versus the times when there was so much distance that I didn't seem to be able to do anything to get through or break through. This was very difficult for me to understand, and it was very difficult to not take that withdrawal personally. And it was very confusing when it was this, you would get really close, and just when you think that you've broken through that barrier, that the very next day you could see this distance. So if this is something that you're experiencing in your relationship with a childhood trauma survivor, I do want you to know that you are not alone and that it is confusing. However, there are some things that you can do as a supporter in this relationship to make things better and create more intimacy. Before I get to the things that my husband were able to do and what we were able to develop throughout the childhood trauma recovery process, just a little bit about my story. My husband and I got married almost 13 years ago in a few days, and we had a wonderful dating experience. However, after we were married, there started to be some behaviors that I just didn't quite understand. And some of the things that I experienced was sort of this sense of not being able to get very close. And this would look like my husband sleeping in a separate bedroom and all of a sudden not sleeping in the same bed. Things that we were able to have close discussions with, all of a sudden things started to get very difficult in communicating. And I also started to experience my husband withdrawing and being very distant, and this led to, in some cases, my husband locking himself in a room in the basement, sometimes for days. And it was usually after what seemed to be some sort of event, some sort of conflict, something that I said that he took personally, when this withdrawal would start to occur. Then often after a few days, my husband would, what I kind of refer to as, snap out of it and he would be very close, and then he would want to be nowhere but around me. And it was just such an interesting dynamic, and I really just didn't understand it. We struggled with this closeness distance dynamic for a couple of years, and it was only when things just started to break down significantly in my marriage that my husband was able to reveal to me, to anyone for the first time in his entire life, a terrible history of childhood abuse at the hands of the Catholic Church. And it was only after this had been revealed that we were able to take a deep dive into these behaviors, understand why they were occurring, and create new patterns in our relationship. So, how did we start to overcome this closeness distance dynamic? Well, I want to be honest that we do still experience some of this. Trauma survivors can never entirely get rid of those trauma triggers. What they can do is they can start to deal with them better. So in the case where my husband is triggered by something, sometimes we do see this dynamic of distance and him needing to take a break. So we had to work on it together. We had to realize and recognize that there was a need in our particular marriage for both togetherness and space in the relationship. And we needed to be able to create those two in our marriage without taking things personally, and just realizing that that was something that we were going to have to work through. The other thing is that we both had to get better at setting boundaries. So when my husband was starting to set those boundaries that he needed space, I really needed to step back and let those boundaries be. I found that I was often just trying to pull him out from needing that distance. And in some cases, it seemed like nagging or whining, and it was just too much, and it just really didn't work in our relationship. So by me realizing that that boundary was being placed, and that the best thing that I could do was give that space and wait until things were calmer before we had closer discussions about what happened, that was very important in us creating more trust and more intimacy. The other thing that I was able to do that I didn't realize the impact of until much later was just creating a safe environment for my husband. He had never been allowed to express his emotions in the past because of what happened to him, and by me allowing him to have those emotions without trying to stop them, without telling him that he really shouldn't be feeling that way or he shouldn't be angry, but actually allowing those emotions to come to play without any sort of judgment, he was able to be more open with me, and that created more trust and more intimacy. So while it is not easy to develop that trust and intimacy in a relationship with a childhood trauma survivor, and there will be ups and downs along the way, it can happen. And I also want you to know that each marriage is different, and the intimacy that you both need is something that's unique. And each marriage can have different levels of intimacy in different areas and still be able to be happy and healthy. So really think about the different intimacy areas that you feel are lacking in your relationship, and have a discussion about that, about how you can improve those things. I think that was when my husband and I made the best progress, is when things were calm and things were not emotional, when we had discussions about what both he and I needed, that this created more closeness, more trust, and a better relationship in the end. I hope you found this helpful. I am on a mission to help wives who are supporting their husband through childhood trauma recovery. I have spent years researching and trying and failing, and I think that my husband and I's story can help others and bring wives together in a community so that we are not struggling alone. We are not suffering in silence. So if you found this helpful, please like it, follow me for more videos that will be released, and check out my website.